The city of Chicago was drenched in a relentless downpour that evening. Streetlights reflected on the wet asphalt like scattered stars, and cars moved slowly, their tires cutting through the shallow pools of water. Among the few figures standing at a lonely bus stop was Emily, a 22-year-old recent graduate who had come to the city with dreams far larger than her small apartment could hold. She stood silently, clutching her soaked backpack against her chest as the cold wind wrapped around her like invisible chains. It had been another long, unforgiving day. Hours earlier, she had sat in a brightly lit office lobby, rehearsing answers in her mind, straightening her blazer, and convincing herself that this time maybe something would finally work out. But the look in the interviewer's eyes had been distant, the questions mechanical, and the final handshake soft and apologetic. Rejection was becoming a language she understood too well, though she wished she didn't have to. For interviews in 1 month, for polite "we'll get back to you," and 4 silent disappearances into the void. As the rain dripped from the edge of the bus shelter, she thought of home, an old house in Indiana where her parents had sold their car to support her move. They had believed in her more than she believed in herself. Their faith was both a source of strength and a weight she carried everywhere she went. She had promised them that she would build a better life, that she would prove their sacrifices were not in vain. But standing there, shivering, tired, and drenched, that promise felt distant, almost like a memory fading in the fog. The city around her moved on, as if her struggles were invisible. Commuters hurried past with umbrellas. Taxi horns echoed faintly, and tall buildings stood indifferent against the storm. Her bus was late. Her phone battery blinked at 3%. Home was 10 long blocks away. The thought of walking through the icy rain tempted her, but exhaustion anchored her to the spot. It wasn't just physical exhaustion. It was the kind that comes from giving everything and receiving nothing in return. It was a quiet fatigue of trying again and again without a single door opening. She closed her eyes for a moment and tilted her head upward. Raindrops struck her face, rolling down like tiny reminders that the world would keep moving whether she was ready or not. She thought about the girl she used to be, filled with ambition, energy, and hope. She remembered late nights studying under dim dorm lights, the excitement of receiving her college acceptance letter, the proud smile on her father's face, and the tears of joy in her mother's eyes. Those moments had felt like the beginning of a grand story. But now, the chapters were filled with uncertainty. In that lonely moment at the bus stop, something stirred deep within her. It wasn't a loud realization, but a quiet, stubborn spark. It was a thought that perhaps life was testing her resolve, not denying her destiny. She had always imagined success as a door she needed to knock on once. But maybe it was more like a wall she needed to keep striking until it cracked. Maybe every rejection, every rainy night, every cold weight was shaping something within her that she couldn't yet see. The bus finally appeared through the mist, its headlights slicing through the rain. As it approached, she took one last breath of cold air and stepped forward. The warmth inside the bus felt like a fragile shelter against the storm outside. She sat by the window, resting her head against the cool glass. As the city blurred past, reflections of streetlights and raindrops merged into a moving canvas. She saw her own tired reflection staring back, not defeated, but quietly determined. The ride home was long and slow, but her mind was awake. She began to think differently. Perhaps waiting for the perfect opportunity wasn't the way forward. Perhaps she needed to create it. She realized that for months, she had sent emails and applications like millions of others, hoping for a lucky break. But maybe her strength lay in persistence, not passivity. She imagined walking into offices in person, introducing herself boldly, volunteering to work just to prove her worth, learning whatever she needed to learn even if no one was watching. By the time the bus reached her stop, the rain had softened to a drizzle. She stepped off, her shoes splashing in shallow puddles, but her steps were firmer than before. The night sky was still overcast, but there was a strange sense of clarity in her chest. She walked through the quiet streets toward her small studio apartment, not as a defeated graduate, but as someone quietly preparing for a comeback. The next morning, before the city fully woke, she sat at her small wooden desk with a cup of black coffee and made a list. It wasn't a list of dreams or vague wishes. It was a list of actions, companies she admired, places she wanted to learn from, neighborhoods she had yet to explore. She planned her route like a soldier mapping out a campaign. There would be no more waiting for calls that never came. There would only be movement, however slow, however imperfect. In the weeks that followed, she walked miles through the city. She showed up at offices without appointments, handed out resumes, spoke to strangers, and offered to volunteer. Most days she still heard no, but the way she heard it changed. It no longer felt like a rejection of her worth, but just another step forward. Each no built resilience. Each door that stayed closed taught her how to find another one. She began to grow, not in the way she had once imagined, through sudden success, but through the quiet strength of perseverance. One afternoon, while visiting a small design firm she had admired from afar, she was asked to help with a project as a temporary assistant. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a dream job, but she showed up early, worked late, and poured herself into every task. Weeks later, she was offered a permanent position. It wasn't luck. It was a reward for every rainy night, every lonely bus stop, every moment she had refused to quit. Years passed, and Emily slowly built a career she had once only dared to imagine. She moved to a better apartment, helped her parents pay off their debts, and found herself walking confidently through the same streets that once felt overwhelming. She often thought back to that night at the bus stop, drenched and uncertain, staring up at the rain. She realized that it had been a turning point. Though it didn't look like one at the time, the storm had not been the end of her journey. It had been the beginning of her strength. Success, she learned, isn't built on perfect days. It's built on the cold nights, the late buses, the unanswered applications, and the quiet decision to keep going when no one is watching. The world hadn't changed overnight. She had.